Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I am going to be taking a look at the very impressive catalogue from one of the most respected and decorated ensembles of all time. And they've been around since the late 70s and they've had a lot of lineup changes and different personnel in their history. But the core of the sound has always remained intact, but is constantly evolving. And they've dabbled in all genres, from jazz to rock to fusion to pop to funk, you name it. This band has done it all. And the band that I am talking about is, of course, the one and only Steps Ahead. And as I mentioned already, Steps Ahead have had a lot of lineup changes and different personnel in their history. But there has always been one constant who has been in the band since its inception, and he has been in every single incarnation and remains to this day very much at the helm, and that's vibraphonist, bandleader and composer Mike Mainieri. And Mike Mainieri is not what you would call your traditional vibraphonist, and unlike other vibraphonists like Gary Burton and Milt Jackson, to name a few, what Mike Mainieri does with the vibraphones is very different. He is a keyboardist slash pianist, and he has his vibraphones rigged up to a vibraharp and a synclavier, and he uses a lot of effects pedals and synthesizer programming. And when he hits the mallets, it sounds like there's a keyboard player playing alongside him, but it's all Mike Mainieri, and that is what makes the unique sound of Steps Ahead. So, for example, when he's playing the mallets, sometimes it can sound like glass, and sometimes it can make like echoey sounds. Mike Mainieri can do it all on the vibraphone, and that to me makes him a very special musician. And Steps Ahead have had some of the biggest names and the most important figures playing the band. And while Mike Mainieri has always been the constant throughout, he has had other musicians such as saxophonist Michael Brecker, Bob Berg, Bendik Hofsev, Bill Evans, Ernie Watts and Donny McCaslin. He has also had pianists and keyboardists such as Don Grolnick, Elian Elias, Rachel Zed, Adam Holzman and Warren Bernhard. He's had some of the biggest names from the guitar world such as Mike Stern, Kazumi Watanabe, Chuck Loeb and Steve Kahn. He's had some big name bass players such as Eddie Gomez, Daryl Jones, Tony Levin from King Crimson, Victor Bailey, Richard Boner, Mark Johnson, and he's had some of the biggest names from the drum world such as the legendary Steve Gadd, Peter Erskine from Weather Report, Steve Smith from Journey, Dennis Chambers, Clarence Penn. The list goes on, and that's a pretty impressive roster of musicians who have played in this incredible band. And Steps Ahead was formed in 1979 at the 7th Avenue Jazz Club in New York City, and they were originally called Steps, and they would later change their name to Steps Ahead and have remained with that name to this very day. And as I mentioned, when you hear Steps Ahead, you know straight away who it is, and the sound of the band is always Mike Mainieri and his vibraphones, and on the front line with him is usually a saxophone, and that is what creates the unique sound of Steps Ahead. So for today's special edition, I am going to be taking a look at their very impressive catalogue of albums, which is a total of 12 recordings with 4 live albums and 8 studio recordings. And as always, I am going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. And it's a very tough one because all of these albums are fantastic, well produced and well played. Obviously, there are some albums that are a little bit better than others, but that does not take away from the fact that this is a very strong catalogue of music, and there's no weak recording in sight. So we're going to start with the first album, and this is a double live recording, and this came out in 1980, and this is Steps Smoking in the Pit. So as I mentioned already, Steps Ahead formed in 1979 at the 7th Avenue Club, and they were originally called Steps. And you can hear on this double live outing the the sound that we would come to know Steps Ahead for, and this would pretty much define them throughout their entire history. And as you'd expect, nothing but world-class music and musicianship from some of the best in the world. So on disc 1, we've got Teabag, Loverman, 40 Tenors, Song to Seth, and then on disc 2 we've got Young and Fine, Soul Eyes, Not Ethiopia, and for me, the greatest Mike Mainieri composition of all time, and certainly Steps Ahead's signature track, Sarah's Touch. So let's have a quick look. So Steps is Mike Mainieri on vibraphone, Michael Brecker on saxophone, Steve Gadd on drums, Don Grolnick on piano, Eddie Gomez on bass, and a special guest appearance with Kazumi Watanabe on guitar. So there they are. So standout tracks for me are Sarah's Touch, which goes without saying, Not Ethiopia, Young and Fine, which is a standard, originally composed by the late Joe Zawinul, 40 Tenors, and Song to Seth. Brilliant double live recording, and as I mentioned, nothing but the absolute best. So there you have it, Steps, Smoking in the Pit. Very hard album to find, but if you do, worth checking out. Top notch from these guys, nothing but the absolute best. So we would come to the next album, and this would be their first studio recording, and this came out also in the same year, in 1980. This is Step by Step, and this features the same lineup: Michael Brecker, Steve Gadd, Eddie Gomez, Don Grolnick, and Mike Mainieri. So we've got Uncle Bob, Kyoto, Ballet, Bullet Train, and Six Persimmons. Really good album. Some very strong playing from Michael Brecker, who sounds tremendous in everything he does. Steve Gadd, probably, the most legendary drummer of all time. Eddie Gomez, a true legend of the bass. And Don Grolnick, he just always sounds great on piano. And Mike Mainieri, he's just blowing all cylinders on vibraphone. So, very good album, Step by Step. And then the next album would be released in 1981, and this is a live recording, and this is Paradox. And again, same lineup, but this time we've got Peter Erskine on drums, and we've got tracks like NL4, The Alp, Passion of Blue, Four Chords, Take a Walk, Nechka, and The Elf, which is an alternate take, which is like nearly 20 minutes long. So brilliant recording. Standout tracks for me are Passion of Blue, Four Chords, and Take a Walk, and NL4. Brilliant album. And this is probably the easiest way to buy this album. It's just buy it as a double, because it's very hard to find the two recordings separate. But if you can, buy them. But I'd probably highly recommend just buy the double. It's a lot easier, but it's brilliant stuff. So we would come to the next album, and by this point, Steps are now renamed as Steps Ahead, and this would pretty much stay with them throughout their history. So this album would be released in 1983, and we would see another lineup change: the lovely and very talented Elian Elias on piano, and this is their self-titled recording, Steps Ahead. This to me is one of the classic lineups of Steps Ahead. Michael Brecker, Mike Mainieri, Peter Erskine, Eddie Gomez, and Elian Elias. Brilliant band. Even though this band only made one album with this lineup of musicians, to me it's an absolute classic. So we've got Pools, Islands, Loxodrome, Both Sides of the Coin, Skyward Bound, Northern Cross, and an improvisation called Trio with Eddie Gomez, Mike Mainieri, and Michael Brecker. It's a brilliant album. Standout tracks for me are Pools, Islands, Both Sides of the Coin, Skyward Bound, and Trio. It's a brilliant album, one that I still go back to quite a lot, and with good reason. It's a classic, and it features, for me, one of the classic lineups of Steps Ahead. Even though they only made one album, but it's still worth checking out, just for the musicianship and the music alone. So there you have it, the self-titled album, Steps Ahead. So we would come to the next album, and this would be released in 1984, and this would feature yet another lineup change, a very familiar face, and this is Steps Ahead, Modern Times. So we've still got Peter Erskine, Eddie Gomez, Michael Brecker, and Mike Mainieri, and we've got Warren Bernhardt on keyboards, and he's an old friend of theirs. He's been playing with Steps Ahead on and off since the 70s, and to me, he would probably go down as the definitive keyboard player for Steps Ahead. All due respect to the others, but when I think of the keyboard players of Steps Ahead, Warren Bernhardt's the man I think of, and he's always played with these guys, and he's always played a big role in their music for many, many years. So we got Safari, Oops, Self-Portrait, Modern Times, Radioactive, Now You Know, and Old Town. So by this point, Steps Ahead are now starting to dabble into electric with lots of keyboards. Michael Brecker plays Iwi, and they'll start to develop more of an electronic sound as opposed to the traditional acoustic approach that they had on their earlier albums. So you can definitely see that there was a big shift in Steps Ahead's music. So standout tracks for me are Safari, Oops, Modern Times, which is the title track, Radioactive, and Now You Know. But this is a really good album, and you can definitely see Steps Ahead were in transition mode as they will start to move towards keyboards and electronics and moving away from the acoustic approach that defined their early part of their history. So there you have it, Steps Ahead, Modern Times. Brilliant album. Love it. Now this next album, which was released in 1986, and this to me could very well be the biggest album of their entire career, and this is Magnetic. So as I mentioned, with Modern Times, they were starting to move more and more into electronics and keyboards driven, and as I mentioned, Michael Brecker would start to dabble in the electronic wind instruments, aka the Iwi, and Magnetic is just smash mouth, hard hitting, very aggressive, and just full on fusion, but still very much in the traditional sound of Steps Ahead. So we've got Chuck Loeb, Mike Mainieri, Victor Bailey, Peter Erskine, Michael Brecker, and a whole bunch of other big names as well. Mitch Foreman is on a couple of tracks as well. Paul Jackson on guitar. It's a real big who's who of musicians, and a lot of their signature tracks are actually on Magnetic. So we've got Trains, Beirut, Cajun, In a Sentimental Mood, Magnetic Love, Sumo, All the Tea in China, Something I Said, and Reprise, Magnetic Love. This is just absolutely really going for the balls here, really right in your face, and to me this is probably Steps Ahead's biggest album, and the tour that followed this, whew, dynamite stuff, absolutely killer. So standout tracks for me are Something I Said, All the Tea in China, Sumo, which has got just one of the most ferocious Michael Brecker sax solos you'll ever hear, and Cajun, and In a Sentimental Mood, which is just absolutely gorgeous with Michael Brecker on Iwi and Mike Mainieri on keyboards. It's just absolutely top notch. So there you have it, Steps Ahead, Magnetic. For me, the biggest album of their entire catalogue, and probably one of their best. Top notch stuff. So Michael Brecker would leave Steps Ahead after the tour of Magnetic, and he would go on to forge his own solo career, but he would still return to the band every so often. So fast forward to the next album, which came out in 1989, and this for me, as I said, Magnetic is the biggest album of their entire catalogue, but this album, which I'm about to talk about in a second, is quite possibly my favourite Steps Ahead album of all time. Obviously Steps Ahead made their big legendary music with Michael Brecker, not taking anything away from him, but for me, the period from the late 80s to the mid 90s, to me was probably some of Steps Ahead's best music, and that's all due respect to Brecker, but I just loved the music that they made here. So this would be their next album, which came out in 1989, and this could very well be my favourite Steps Ahead album of all time. This is NYC. So every song on this album is just brilliantly well composed, well produced, and it's just absolutely fantastic. So Michael Brecker is gone, and his replacement would be Bendik Hufsev, who is pretty much unknown and remains unknown to this day, sadly, but he is an amazing sax player. Different kind of beast to Michael Brecker. Bendick's playing is very similar to younger Barak from his ECM recordings. He's got a very unique sound, and at times on this album it does sound like Michael Brecker, but Bendick is far from a Brecker clone. He is very much his own man, and this is some of his best playing, and some of his most beautiful compositions are featured on this album. And he played a very big part in Steps Ahead, and he's pretty much remained Steps Ahead main sax player for quite a lot of years. So this lineup, which for me could very well be my favourite Steps Ahead lineup. So we've got Mike Mainieri on vibraphones, acoustic piano and percussion, Bendick on saxophones, Steve Kahn on electric and acoustic guitars, Tony Levin on electric bass and Chapman stick from King Crimson. There you go. And Steve Smith from Journey on drums. That's a lineup right there. Doesn't get any better than that. And then we got some guest appearances from Ray Gomez on electric guitar, Ricky Pantoja on piano, Stephen Barber and Bruce Martin. And then we've also got some guest appearances from Mascool and the African Posse, Masamba Fall, Abdoulaye Diop and Majete Fall. So some big names here, but this lineup is just good stuff here. So we've got, well, in that case, one of Steps Ahead's signature tracks, Lust for Life, Stone Girl Calling, Red Neon Go or Give, and for me, the greatest Steps Ahead track of all time, and I definitely put it up there with Sarah's Touch, Sharonga, Go Get It, NYC, Stick Jam, Absolutely Maybe, Festival, and Paradiso. It's a fantastic album, NYC. Absolutely love this. Standout tracks for me are, well, in that case, Lust for Life, Sengal, Calling, Red Neon, Go or Give, Charanga, my favourite track of the entire album, Stick Jam, and Paradiso. It's just brilliant. The track that I listen to the most on NYC is Charanga. It's just absolutely beautiful, and it goes a little something like do 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 do. Just love it. It's just, to me, that's the Steps Ahead track. That's the track. Brilliant album. There you have it. NYC, quite possibly my favourite Steps Ahead album of all time. So we would move on to the next album, and this came out in 1992, and this is Yin Yang. So once again, another lineup change. So we've still got Mike Mainieri, Bendick, and this time we've got Jeff Andrews on bass, Steve Smith on drums, and the lovely and very talented Rachel Zed on keyboards and piano. This was pretty much my first exposure to Steps Ahead many years ago. I first heard of Steps Ahead on a German channel called FreeSat, and they used to play like loads of instrumental music late at night, and this was the album that they used to play constantly, and that was how I first became aware of this band. And to me, this is my go-to album, this and NYC, two of my favourite Steps Ahead recordings of all time. So we've got Sidewalk Maneuvers, brilliant. Praise, another great track. Night Owl, which was the first track I ever heard. He went like this. Love it. Taxi, Tamarin, Lion, Gory Details, Agitates the Gravel, Okipi, Orion, Stepish, which is just like fast, and Steps Ahead at their ferocious, and a nice reworking of the classic Mike Mainieri composition Sarah's Touch, which gets a nice full keyboard and sax workout by Bendick and Rachel Zed. Love this album. And we've also got some guest appearances on here as well. We've got Jimmy Tunnell on electric guitar, who's featured on Praise, Sidewalk Maneuvers and Taxi. Steve Kahn returns here on electric guitar. He plays on Night Owl, Gory Details, Sidewalk Maneuvers, Stepish and Okapi. And then we've got Wayne Krantz on electric and acoustic guitar on Tamarind Lion and Okapi. Chuck Loeb on rhythm guitar on Night Owl. Victor Bailey on electric bass, also on Night Owl. Rick Margitze on saxophone on Steppish and Side Maneuvers. George Whitty on keyboards on Side Maneuvers. Dean Brown on Praise. And then we got Bruce Martin on Praise, Night Owl and Sidewalk Maneuvers. And then we also got some British guests. We've got Spencer Cozens on keyboards, who appear on Agitate v Gravel. Miles Bold on percussion and sequencing, and Alan Thompson on bass. So some big names here. So there's the band. Produced by Mike Mainieri. Most of the compositions are written and composed by Mike Mainieri, with some contributions from Bendick and Rachel Zed and Cozens and Bold, but it's a really good album and another favourite Steps Ahead recording that I love going back to. So standout tracks for me are Sidewalk Maneuvers, Night Owl, Gory Details, Steppish, Orion, and of course, goes without saying once again, Sarah's Touch. So there you have it. Yin Yang. One of my other favourite albums of Steps Ahead from this period. Just love this album. This and NYC, my two favourites of all time. So we would come to the next album, which would be released in 1994, and this is a live album, and this could very well be the best live album that Steps Ahead have ever put out, and this is Steps Ahead Live in Tokyo 1986, and this features, for me, quite possibly the baddest of them all, the best lineup of Steps Ahead: Michael Brecker, Mike Mainieri, Mike Stern, Daryl Jones, and Steve Smith. Doesn't get any better than this, and this is some of Mike Stern's most ferocious guitar playing, and Steve Smith, he's just an absolute monster on the drum kit, and even plays a bit of electronic drums as well. Daryl Jones is just down and dirty on bass. Michael Brecker is just in full-on beast mode, and Mike Mainieri, he just sounds brilliant as always. And all due respect to the songs on Magnetic, which is, you know, as I said, the biggest album of their career, but I think the Magnetic tracks on this live album just sound even better. And, you know, when you've got Mike Stern and Steve Smith on your team, and even Michael Brecker as well, you're not going to go wrong. So this is just an absolute red-hot album. Steps Ahead at their ferocious best, on steroids, in full-on beast mode. Doesn't get any better than this. And the DVD of this is just, woo, absolutely brilliant. What can I say? Standout tracks for me: Beirut, Oops, Sumo, which has got one of the best Michael Brecker sax solos you'll ever hear, Safari, In a Sentimental Mood, and Trains, which has got some of Mike Stern's best guitar playing. And, you know, it's quite weird that Mike Stern never recorded a studio album with them. Would have loved to have heard that, but, you know, we got this live album, and he's just cooking on all cylinders. Love it. So there you have it. Steps Ahead, live in Tokyo, 1986. For me, the best Steps Ahead live album ever. Doesn't get any better than this. And if there was one live album that I would recommend to anyone, if they're looking to get into Steps Ahead, this is the one. Brilliant stuff. So we would move on to the next album. And this was released in 1995. And I've gone back to listening to this again, actually. I was listening to this the other day. I hadn't listened to this in quite some time. And I forgot what a good album this was. And this is Vibe. It's a really good album. I forgot all about how good this was. I wouldn't say this was the weakest. Maybe I did think that for a long time, but I've gone back and listened to this again. And it's really good. I forgot what a great album this was. So we've got Buzz, From Light to Light, Penn Station, Vibe, which is the title track, Green Dolphin Street, Miles Away, Staircase, Rendezvous, Crunch, Waxing and Waning, and Miles Away, Reprise, The Gentle Giant. It's a really good Steps Ahead album. As I've said, I don't really go back to this one much, but I've started to recently, and I just love it. It's just a really good album, this is. So we got Donny McCason, Michael Caine, not the actor, by the way, Victor Bailey, Clarence Penn, Tim Hagans, Aaron Helkick, Adam Holzman, Rachel Zed, James Jennis, Clarence Penn, and Reggie Washington, and Adam Holzman, who's played with Miles Davis, Jane Getter, Stephen Wilson, to name a few. You know, he's played with just about everyone, and he's a brilliant keyboard player. So the standout tracks for me are Buzz, which is a nice funky track, Miles Away, Vibe, Penn Station, Rendezvous. Love this track. It's a really fun track, and for some reason, I always picture a dog in a cartoon running, and it goes like this. Don't know why, but it's a fun track. I like it. Staircase and Miles Away, which is like an acoustic trio with Mike Mainieri on piano and James Jennis on acoustic bass and Clarence Penn on drums, and Waxing and Waning. It's a really good album, Vibe. I forgot how good this was. I'm glad I revisited it. It's a really good album. So there you have it, Vibe. And this would be the last album that Steps Ahead would make of new material. And I'm really hoping they do come back and make some new music. It's been a long time. It's been like over, about 26 years now since we've had some new material. It's been a long time, and we're overdue now, and hopefully Mike Mainieri puts Steps Ahead back together and makes some more new music, because we need some more. You know, it's been a long time. So there you have it, Steps Ahead Vibe, an album that I've just recently revisited, and it turned out to be better than I even remembered. It's a really good, fun album. So we would fast forward to the next album, which was released in 2002, and this is a double live album, and this is Holding Together, live in Europe, 1999. It's a good album. A little bit more laid back than Live in Tokyo, 1986, but it's still a great, fun jazz acoustic album. So we've got Mike Mainieri, Bob Berg, Elian Elias, Mark Johnson, and Peter Erskine. Now, Mark Johnson and Peter Erskine are no strangers to each other. They've played with just about everyone as a rhythm section. Bass Desires, John Abercrombie, Lyle Mays, you know, they've been around the block and they've played with just about everyone. Bob Berg, of course, has played with Miles Davis, Mike Stern, you know, he's played with just about everyone. Elian Elias, of course, is, you know, one of the original members of Steps Ahead from the early years, and she's now a huge star in the jazz world, and it's great to have her back here. To me, she is the iconic piano player of Steps Ahead. You know, I love Rachel Zed, she's my lady, but Elian Elias is the iconic Steps Ahead pianist. And, you know, Warren Bernhard as well, I have to put him up there too. So I would probably say Elian Elias and Warren Bernhard are like the two iconic pianists / keyboardists of Steps Ahead. So it's really nice to have her back here in a reunion with Peter Erskine and Mike Mainieri. So it's a double album. This one's got Bowing to Bud, Copland, Autumn Rose, the classic Paul's All the Things You Are / Soul Eyes, and Uncle Bob. And then on disc 2 we've got D minor, The Time Is Now, In a Sentimental Mood, Friday Night at the Catalogue Club. It's a really good album, this is. There you go. A really fun album. So, standout tracks for me are Autumn Rose, Paul's All the Things You Are / Soul Eyes, Bowing to Bud, and then on disc 2, In a Sentimental Mood, The Time Is Now, and D minor. It's a really good live album, this is. As I said, a little bit more laid back, a little bit more on the acoustic realm, as opposed to the earlier electronic fusion outing, but this is still good stuff here. And, you know, we would sadly lose Bob Berg just a few years after this, but he really channels in his inner Michael Brecker and delivers some of his best playing with Steps Ahead. So there you have it, Holding Together, live in Europe, 1999. It's a good, fun live album. And we would fast forward to 2016 when this album came out. And this is kind of like a big band reworking of Steps Ahead tracks. And this is Steps Ahead, Stepping Out. So we've got Bill Evans on tenor and soprano saxophone, Chuck Loeb, who we sadly lost just after this album, Tom Kennedy on bass, and Steve Smith on drums, and the WDR big band. Really good, fun album. So this is basically all classic Steps Ahead compositions reworked with the WDR big band. And you know what? Don't miss a beat. Sounds absolutely fantastic. So we've got Paul's, Steppish, Blue Montreux, Self-Portrait, Oops, Beirut, Sarah's Touch. Gotta have Sarah's Touch. You cannot have a Steps Ahead album without Sarah's Touch. It's a must. I'll put that in their contract if I have to. You must have Sarah's Touch, signature track. And we got Trains. So brilliant album. Very interesting to hear big band reworkings of Steps Ahead songs, but I love it. It's good. I've just gone back to listen to this again after a long time. So standout tracks for me are Blue Montreux, Self-Portrait, Steppish, Oops, and Sarah's Touch. Doesn't get any better than this. So there you have it. Steps Ahead, Stepping Out. And this is the last studio album that they've recorded, but it doesn't really feature any new songs. The last album that they've done of new material was Vibe, which was in 1995. So we are long overdue for a brand new Steps Ahead album. So there you have it. Stepping Out. Brilliant stuff. So the best Steps Ahead album for me, it's easy. NYC. Love this. Come on. Tony Levin from King Crimson, Steve Kahn on guitar, Steve Smith from Journey on drums. That's a lineup and a half. I'm telling you, that's my favourite Steps Ahead incarnation of all time. And Charanga is just, for me, up there with Sarah's Touch. It's the greatest Steps Ahead song of all time. And those are the two songs I think of when I think of Steps Ahead. It's just brilliant. So there you have it. Steps Ahead NYC, my favourite album. 12 recordings in total, 4 live albums, 8 studio albums, and NYC is my favourite. Love it. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Steps Ahead album? Is it NYC? Is it Yin Yang? Is it the self-titled? Or is it Magnetic? Or is it Vibe? Or is it some of the live recordings? There's no right or wrong answer. You know what to do. We all have our favourites. Leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until next time, take care everybody and stay safe. And once again, thanks for listening.